His story is one of passion, worship, war, wisdom, and vengeance. Marduk, the mighty son of Enki, was never meant to rule, yet he defied the cosmic order to become the most powerful god of ancient Mesopotamia. He was a warrior, a ruler, a usurper, and a deity whose ambition shattered traditions, reshaping both spiritual and political power in the ancient world. From the grand Esagila temple in Babylon, his name was exalted above all others. He seized the title of King of the Gods, once reserved for the Enlilite deities, those who had governed Earth's destiny since the first days of civilization. Marduk's rise to supremacy was not a birthright, it was a conquest. His was a struggle not only of blood and war, but of divine law itself, a battle waged both in the heavens and on earth. He was the god who dared to rewrite the rules, who defied celestial decrees, overthrew ancient traditions, and sought absolute dominion over all realms. His followers declared him the one true ruler. His priesthood rewrote myths to cast him as the architect of creation, and under his name, Babylon rose to become the most powerful empire of its time. Yet his ambition made him as many enemies as it did worshippers. To his devoted priests and kings, he was the divine monarch, the lord of order, the one who tamed chaos. To his Anunnaki rivals, he was a rebellious usurper, an interloper who disrupted the sacred balance. And to the worshippers of Yahweh, he was something far worse, the enemy of their God, the false king, the deceiver who led Babylon into corruption and idolatry. His name, once invoked in temples and royal courts, would later be cursed in biblical texts. His city, once the heart of civilization, was condemned to fire and ruin. His priests were scattered, his followers exiled, and his memory was nearly erased from history. This is the story of Marduk. This is the story of the god who dared to rule the world. As the patron god of Babylon, Marduk ascended to a position of supreme authority within the Mesopotamian pantheon, overshadowing older deities who had ruled for millennia. His worship was centered at Esagila, the grand temple of Babylon, where priests elevated him above all other gods. His influence extended beyond the temple walls, symbolized by the towering Ziggurat Etemenanki, a structure so monumental that many believe it inspired the biblical Tower of Babel. Yet Marduk's rise was not an organic evolution in Mesopotamian theology. It was a revolution. Unlike Anu, Enlil, and Ninurta, who had been worshipped since the earliest days of Sumer, Marduk's supremacy came late and was highly contested. He did not inherit power, he seized it, reshaping Babylonian mythology and political dominance in the process. As we look at the story of Marduk, it seems as though we are looking at the story of Babylon and its emergence as a dominant power. Unlike the ancient Sumerian deities, whose influence can be traced back to the dawn of civilization, Marduk's ascension coincided with Babylon's rise. Founded around 1894 BCE under Sumu-Abum, Babylon initially remained a small kingdom in the shadows of more established centers, such as Nippur, Ur, and Lagash. However, this dynamic changed dramatically during the reign of Hammurabi from 1792 to 1750 BCE. Through military conquest, administrative reforms, and religious consolidation, Hammurabi transformed Babylon into the preeminent power of Mesopotamia. With political dominance came the necessity for religious justification, and thus, the priesthood of Babylon rewrote divine history, positioning Marduk as the supreme ruler of the gods. This transformation was codified in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that portrays Marduk as the hero who defeats the chaos dragon Tiamat, establishes cosmic order, and is granted absolute divine authority over heaven and earth. This was not merely a theological development, it was a political strategy, ensuring that Babylon's rulers could claim divine legitimacy through Marduk's patronage. The old Sumerian traditions, however, tell a different story. In earlier records, divine kingship belonged to Enlil, the lord of Nippur, and his warrior son, Ninurta. Marduk's sudden elevation was not just a shift in religious devotion, but an assertion of Babylonian supremacy, cementing its place as the new spiritual and political center of Mesopotamia. This, in a very simplified form, is what traditional history has to say about Marduk. However, here on this channel, we interpret that Marduk was not merely a god revered by the Mesopotamians in a distant past. What we analyze here is that Marduk was an Anunnaki, a flesh and blood being who descended from the skies and was present in Earth's ancient past. According to this alternative perspective, Marduk was not merely a Babylonian construct, but a living ruler, an Anunnaki being whose actions shaped the course of human history. He was the son of Enki, one of the first Anunnaki to arrive on Earth. His lineage alone should have secured his position within the Anunnaki hierarchy, but instead, it placed him at the center of one of the greatest power struggles ever recorded. Unlike the Enlilite faction, which traditionally ruled over Earth, Marduk's claim to dominion was challenged at every turn. His ambitions extended far beyond the walls of Babylon. He sought to rule not just a single kingdom, but the entire planet. This thirst for absolute control brought him into direct conflict with both divine and earthly forces, leading to a series of exiles, betrayals, and wars that would alter the fate of humanity itself. One of the most controversial events tied to Marduk's legacy is his marriage to a human woman, Sarpanit. According to the research of Zecharia Sitchin, this was not merely a personal affair, but a cosmic event that changed the divine order. By choosing a human as his wife, Marduk set a precedent, one that shattered the divide between gods and mortals. Inspired by his actions, the Igigi, the Anunnaki workers stationed on Mars, saw this as permission to take human wives of their own. Their decision triggered an event eerily similar to the biblical story of the Watchers, celestial beings who descended to Earth and interbred with humans, leading to the birth of the Nephilim. The Igiji's rebellion marked a turning point in the Anunnaki hierarchy. Though Marduk did not actively incite the revolt, his actions provided justification for their defiance. What followed was a catastrophic upheaval, one that led to the fall of the Igigi and the restructuring of power among the Anunnaki. Some researchers draw a striking parallel between Marduk and the biblical Lucifer, as both figures were once powerful, revered beings who challenged established authority. Both sought to elevate themselves beyond their designated station, and both were ultimately punished and cast down. However, while this comparison makes for a compelling narrative, it is important to approach it with a critical lens. Although the idea that Marduk's fall inspired later myths about Lucifer's rebellion holds weight, it is not the only interpretation. Some researchers suggest that the biblical Lucifer is more closely linked to the myths of Inanna, the Venus goddess of the Romans, and Dumuzi, the shepherd king. These stories explore themes of descent, betrayal, and exile, which align more closely with the archetype of the fallen Lightbringer. We have explored these concepts in another video on this channel, where we delve deeper into the connections between Anunnaki myths and later religious traditions. Marduk's rise to power was not a smooth transition, but rather the result of an intense struggle within the Anunnaki hierarchy. His lineage alone did not guarantee his dominance. As the son of Enki, he was part of an Enkiite faction, and we could say that this was a rival group to the Enlilites, who had traditionally controlled the governance of Earth. Enki was once a ruler when he first arrived and established Eridu. but later in other myths, Enlil appear as the rulership and leader, as he is known as the Lord of Air and Winds, but also the leader on earth. In this point, divine kingship belonged to Enlil and his successors. This created a deep rift between the two factions, and Marduk found himself at the center of the conflict. The legitimacy of Marduk's claim to power was fiercely contested. Unlike Enlil's son Ninurta, who was raised as the heir to the divine rulership, Marduk was considered an outsider when it came to Earth's political order. He was a god of Babylon, a relatively latecomer to Mesopotamian civilization, whereas the ruling deities of Sumer had long held dominance over established religious centers like Nippur, Ur, and Lagash. His rise was seen by many as a political coup, an attempt to rewrite divine authority rather than inherit it through the proper succession. Marduk's ambitions brought him into direct confrontation with the older gods and their established institutions. The power struggle that ensued was not just a theological evolution. It was a tangible, political, and territorial battle among flesh and blood beings who ruled over cities, temples, and institutions that shaped the civilization of Mesopotamia. As Marduk gained influence, he sought to overthrow the traditional power structure, positioning Babylon as the new divine center of the world. However, his efforts were met with fierce resistance from the Enlilite loyalists, who viewed him as an illegitimate usurper, encroaching upon territories that were not his to rule. This struggle reshaped the political and spiritual landscape of Mesopotamia, leading to the eventual supremacy of Babylon. Marduk's transformation from a minor god to the supreme deity was not just a shift in religious ideology, it was a geopolitical revolution. The Babylonian priesthood has a direct participation in this transformation by rewriting myths and religious texts to position Marduk as the king of the gods. The Enuma Elish, composed under Babylonian rule, depicted Marduk as the creator of the world, and all other deities appeared as they were direct descendants of Marduk's power. This religious revisionism cemented Marduk's authority and ensured that Babylon's rulers could claim divine legitimacy under his patronage. To fully understand this shift, we must examine the cities and temples that were once the strongholds of the older gods. Before Marduk's rise, the most powerful deities were worshipped in established centers of power that had existed for thousands of years. Nippur, one of the oldest and most sacred cities of Sumer, was home to Ikur, the temple of Enlil, the supreme god of the divine assembly. Enlil was the lord of the heavens and the earth, the deity who separated the sky from the land and decreed the fates of both men and gods. Later, as the balance of power shifted, his warrior son Ninurta took on greater prominence within Nippur, becoming the god of battles and wars, a champion of divine justice and order. Ur, a thriving port city near the Persian Gulf, was the sacred center of lunar worship. It was here that the E-Kishnugal temple was dedicated to Nana, Sin, the moon god, revered as the cosmic timekeeper, the force that controlled the cycles of the night, the tides, and even the fates of men. The priests of Ur were known for their expertise in astronomy and divination, using the movements of the moon to interpret divine will. Two cities, Sippar and Larsa, were dedicated to the sun god Utu Shamash, the bringer of justice and divine law. His great temple, Ibabar, was a center of legal authority where kings and judges sought the god's wisdom in matters of truth and fairness. As the solar deity, Utu was seen as an unstoppable force, illuminating the world and exposing deception wherever it hid. In the deep south of Mesopotamia lay Eridu, the city of Enki, Ea, the god of wisdom, fresh waters, and creation. His temple, E-Abzu, was built over the subterranean abyss, a sacred reservoir of pure waters that was believed to hold the secrets of life and knowledge. Unlike the warlike Enlilite deities, Enki was regarded as a protector of humanity, a god who used his wisdom to aid mortals rather than punish them. Uruk, one of the oldest and most legendary cities of Sumer, was the domain of Inanna Ishtar, the goddess of war, love, and fertility. In Anna, her great temple, she was worshipped as both a nurturer and a destroyer, a goddess who granted kingship but also brought chaos when scorned. She was a deity of contradictions, embodying both the pleasure of love and the brutality of battle. These cities and their deities represented the old divine order, one that Marduk sought to dismantle in favor of Babylon's supremacy. His rise was not just about power, it was about redefining the cosmic hierarchy, casting Babylon as the new seat of divine authority. But this was not done without opposition. Marduk's claim was challenged at every step, and his ultimate ascension required a complete restructuring of the ancient world's religious and political framework. The replacement of these gods in their respective strongholds with Marduk's supremacy signaled a political and theological revolution led by the Babylonian elite. This transformation was not a natural evolution, but a deliberate act of self-elevation, a strategic maneuver by Marduk to claim authority over the entire world. Evidence from ancient tablets suggests that Marduk actively pursued his own elevation, systematically consolidating power and placing Babylon at the center of divine rule. Unlike the older gods, whose authority was deeply tied to their respective regions, Marduk sought to unify control over all territories under his supreme reign. His ambitions extended far beyond Babylon as he sought dominion over the entirety of Earth's 4 designated regions, a goal that would ultimately lead to his repeated exiles and eventual return as Babylon's uncontested ruler. At that time, according to Zecharia Sitchin's studies, in the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization, Earth had been divided into 4 regions. The first region was Sumer, the original domain of the Enlilite gods. Sumer was the hub of early civilization, where Enlil's authority was strongest. Cities like Nippur, Ur, and Eridu were centers of worship for Enlil, Enki, and their divine descendants. The Enlilites had ruled over Sumer since the dawn of civilization, with kingship believed to be a divinely sanctioned right passed down through their lineage. Marduk's intrusion into Sumerian affairs was seen as a direct challenge to Enlil's supremacy. The second region was Egypt. Unlike Sumer, Egypt was governed by Enki's followers, forming a separate but parallel domain of power. Deities such as Ptah, believed by some to be Enki himself, Ra, and Osiris held authority in the region, shaping a distinct yet interconnected civilization. While Marduk, as Enki's son, had ancestral ties to Egypt, his claim over it was still met with resistance, particularly from deities such as Thoth, who was also Enki's son and known in Sumerian mythology as Ningishida. Thoth opposed Marduk's aggressive rise to power. The third region was the Indus Valley. The Indus Valley, home to the Harappan civilization, was distinct from both Sumer and Egypt. Although its ruling Anunnaki deities remain unclear in surviving records, some theories suggest that it was under Inanna's influence or that it was a neutral region managed by a separate group of Anunnaki. The fourth region, the Sinai Peninsula, was not a civilization, but a critical infrastructural asset. The Anunnaki spaceport, a site of extreme importance to the gods. The Sinai Peninsula contained landing sites and facilities that connected Earth to the heavens. This was the forbidden region of the gods. This division of territories did not satisfy Marduk. Enlil and his sons controlled the first region. Enki and his sons, including Marduk himself, occupied the Egyptian region, and Inanna alone was granted a vast territory. Inanna, according to some myths, was Enki's daughter, while other myths claim she was the daughter of Enlil, or even a direct daughter of Anu, the father of the heavens. According to the theory developed here, Inanna was part of Enlil's clan and one of his daughters. Could this explain why Inanna was preferred to assume such a vast region for herself? Marduk's ambition was unprecedented, as no other Anunnaki had ever sought to unify control over all 4 regions. His claim over these territories threatened the balance of power, placing him in direct opposition to Enlil, Ninurta, Nergal, and Thoth, who all saw him as an opportunist attempting to seize dominion beyond his right. His actions led to multiple conflicts, exiles, and returns, as he repeatedly attempted to reclaim his authority over Earth. Here, we find key episodes that will be the subject of future videos, such as the Pyramid Wars, Marduk's exile, and his imprisonment within the Great Pyramid. This is also where the idea emerges that Marduk was none other than Amun-Ra, or Amen-Ra, the supreme god of Egypt. Traditional history explains that the worshippers of Amun-Ra were gradually eliminated by the followers of Aton, or Aten, culminating in the rise of Akhenaten. Later, Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's son, restored the cult of Amun-Ra, reversing his father's reforms. Here, a clear power struggle is evident between 2 opposing visions that challenged the authority of the other gods in an attempt to establish a singular deity. Finally, this dispute seems to be clearly described in the Torah and the Bible, where Yahweh, the self-proclaimed only God, imposes his vision, forbidding worship of any other deity. The Bible portrays Babylon as the arch-enemy of Yahweh's chosen people, with Marduk standing at the center of this opposition. Throughout the Old Testament, Babylon is depicted as a city of sin, corruption, and idolatry, a civilization that defied the will of Yahweh and fell under divine judgment. If we observe this from this perspective, it becomes very clear that Yahweh is either Enlil himself, someone from his Enlilite clan, or a group of gods identified with Enlil. If Marduk claimed power over all territories for himself, and Enlil and his clan, in the figure of Yahweh, rose up against this power grab, then the war and dispute between the 2 factions is evident. This would have led to the choice of Abram, son of Terah, from the Enlilite territories, where one of Enlil's sons, Nanar-Sin, ruled from the top of the Ziggurat of Ur, and was also worshipped in Haran. This dispute, in the years slightly following the period we are studying, would lead to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which was possibly nothing less than the use of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. Such conclusions can be observed through various mythological accounts in different cultures. Although Babylon was not destroyed in the Battle of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Bible makes it very clear that it would be destroyed later. The acts committed by the Babylonians were extremely offensive to those professed by Yahweh, who was clearly identified with Enlil's clan: order above love, restriction above free exploration, and the condemnation of any spiritual practice that worshipped anything else, any occult practice, any act of divination or contact with spiritual realms that did not observe the absolute worship of Yahweh. It seems that this same dispute led to all the wars we know of in the region and culminated in the arrival of the expected Messiah, who was later embraced by Christianity but rejected by the Judaism of the time. The book of Isaiah contains one of the most striking condemnations of Babylon. The passage refers to Babylon as the daughter of Chaldea, a proud kingdom that would be brought low as punishment for its arrogance and idolatry. The chapter declares, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne. You felt secure in your wickedness, you said. No one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge led you astray, and you said in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. But evil shall come upon you, which you will not know how to charm away." These verses emphasize Babylon's fall as an act of divine retribution, a punishment against Marduk and the civilization that worshipped him. The destruction of Babylon, often interpreted as a theological victory for Yahweh, was symbolic of the triumph of monotheism over polytheism, with the Bible portraying Yahweh's judgment as the force that ended Marduk's dominance. However, Babylon's decline did not come immediately. Before its final fall, the city continued to thrive under different rulers, one of the most important being Cyrus the Great, the Persian king who conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. What makes Cyrus's conquest particularly interesting is the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document written in cuneiform that declares that Marduk himself chose Cyrus to overthrow Babylon's last king, Nabonidus. The text states that Marduk saw Cyrus as a liberator who would restore order to the kingdom and take care of the people. This raises a fascinating question. Did Cyrus genuinely worship Marduk, or was this declaration a strategic political maneuver to legitimize his rule? Some scholars suggest that Cyrus, as a Persian ruler, primarily followed Zoroastrianism and may not have truly been devoted to Marduk. However, by claiming Marduk's divine support, he was able to win over Babylon's priesthood and integrate the city into his growing empire without resistance. And it is precisely documents like this that strongly suggest that the gods were, in fact, flesh and blood beings, physically present. Marduk supposedly chose Cyrus in the same way that Marduk, Enki, Enlil and Anu had previously chosen Hammurabi to bring the scepter of power to humanity. Similarly, Ur-Nammu had also been chosen. These documents, Cyrus and the Cyrus Cylinder, Ur-Nammu and the Code of Ur-Nammu, Hammurabi and the Code of Hammurabi, are real records that mention real gods offering humans laws, rules, and instructions that predate the 10 Commandments of the Torah and even the earliest declarations of human rights. Despite Cyrus's successful incorporation of Babylon into the Persian Empire, the religious significance of Marduk continued to fade over time. One of the most dramatic moments in Marduk's decline came during the campaign of Alexander the Great, who entered Babylon in 331 BCE after defeating the Persian king Darius III. Recognizing the city's historical and spiritual importance, Alexander sought to restore Esagila, Marduk's temple, as part of his vision of unifying the world under his rule. However, when he arrived at the temple, he was confronted with an unexpected and disturbing revelation. For traditional historians, Marduk's divine statue was missing. For an alternative view, Marduk was dead. The absence of Marduk's physical presence or his representation was a shocking event that signified the spiritual void left by Babylon's decline. Some sources suggest that the statue may have been stolen or destroyed by Persian rulers, possibly as an attempt to erase the last traces of Babylonian religious power. Others speculate that the disappearance of the statue reflected a deeper cosmic reality, the true end of Marduk's reign over Earth. For traditional history, the missing statue was not merely a religious loss, it had psychological and political ramifications. In Mesopotamian tradition, the presence of a god statue was tied to the city's fate. If the statue was missing, it was as if the god had abandoned the city. For Alexander, who sought to be recognized as the ruler of Babylon, this discovery was a devastating omen. It is said that he suffered great distress following this revelation, and some believe that the mysterious circumstances of his death in 323 BCE may have been linked to this moment. Did the absence of Marduk's presence mark the final downfall of Babylon's spiritual authority? Or was it a sign that the power of the Anunnaki had already shifted elsewhere? The fall of Marduk as a deity and the rise of Yahweh in the biblical tradition illustrate a profound shift in spiritual and political power. The destruction of Babylon was not just a military event, it was a transformation in the way gods were worshipped and perceived. The Bible recorded the victory of Yahweh over Marduk, establishing a monotheistic framework that would dominate the religious landscape for millennia to come. But if history is written by the victors, is this the strongest clue that Marduk was truly dead and his cult was truly defeated? Marduk's story is one of conquest and loss, of ambition and exile, of divinity and mortality. He was a god who broke tradition, who sought not only to rule Babylon, but to rule the entire world. He was worshipped as a divine king, yet cast down as a rebellious usurper. He was praised by kings, yet his name was cursed in the scriptures. The fall of Babylon, prophesied in the book of Isaiah, was more than the destruction of a city. It was the final blow against Marduk's dominion. The Enlilite faction, under the figure of Yahweh, had effectively won the cosmic war, ensuring that Marduk's reign was erased from history. The Bible, written from the perspective of the victors, ensured that Babylon became a cautionary tale, a warning against defying the divine order set by Yahweh. But does this mean Marduk was truly defeated? The cult of Marduk did not simply vanish with the fall of Babylon. Instead, it evolved, persisted in secrecy, and left its mark on esoteric traditions across history. While Marduk's official worship was eradicated through conquests and religious shifts, the question remains: did the Babylonian priesthood continue to preserve his doctrine in secret? Babylon was home to a highly organized priesthood, scholars who managed rituals, prophecies, and astronomical records. These mystics wielded immense influence, not only over religious practice, but also over the political structure of the empire. If Enlil and his followers embodied strict rule, obedience, and control, then Enki's lineage was the opposite, a clan deeply linked to knowledge, magic, and forbidden wisdom. Enki himself was a god of creation, secrets, and arcane teachings, revered as a bringer of science, divine arts, and enlightenment. His sons Marduk and Ninurta, perhaps the same Thoth of Egyptian lore, shared this spiritual inheritance, making them symbols of divine wisdom and esoteric mastery. These figures were tied to mysticism, the occult, and possibly the very origins of Gnostic practices, all of which were explicitly condemned by Yahweh's priests. The Bible systematically fought against these teachings, forbidding divination, astrology, and all forms of hidden knowledge. The very same practices that flourished under Enki's lineage. Was this merely religious doctrine, or was it part of an ancient war against an Anunnaki bloodline that sought to preserve the keys to divine knowledge? There is evidence that Marduk's legacy persisted beyond Babylon, embedded within mystery schools and secret teachings. Some scholars suggest that remnants of Babylonian mystical traditions were absorbed into Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and even Kabbalah, shaping the foundations of Western occultism. One of the most intriguing theories connects Marduk to Thoth, or Ninurta. While Marduk was associated with kingship, divine rulership, and cosmic authority, Thoth was the keeper of knowledge, balance, and higher wisdom. In some traditions, they appear as rivals, Marduk representing centralized divine monarchy, while Thoth embodied esoteric knowledge hidden from the masses. This contrast is echoed in later mystical traditions, where the struggle between rulership and hidden wisdom becomes a recurring theme. Some interpretations suggest that this rivalry found its way into later philosophical and religious movements. In Kabbalistic teachings, the balance between chest, mercy, divine kingship, and gevura, strict justice, hidden knowledge, mirrors the supposed ideological battle between Marduk and Thoth, or Ninurta. Similarly, in Hermeticism, the concept of divine rule versus individual spiritual enlightenment may be traced back to the opposing philosophies associated with these two Anunnaki figures. Could it be that Marduk's priesthood, rather than vanishing, simply rebranded itself, carrying forward his doctrines under new names and symbols? The destruction of Babylon remains one of the most symbolically charged events in ancient history. Its fall has been interpreted as divine punishment, as the political consequence of power struggles, and as a cover-up orchestrated by Marduk's rivals. If Marduk had truly succeeded in making Babylon the center of the world's spiritual and political order, why was it so thoroughly wiped from history? Some theories propose that Babylon's destruction was not merely the fall of a civilization, but a calculated erasure of Marduk's influence, ensuring that he would never again threaten the established divine hierarchy. There are whispers of Marduk's legacy in Western esotericism, traces of his influence in secret societies that guard ancient knowledge. Some suggest that Marduk was never truly destroyed, only transformed, rebranded, and repackaged under different names and teachings. His cult may not rule from temples of stone, but from the shadows of secret traditions. Could Marduk still be alive, somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to rise again? What do you think about it? Thank you for watching until now. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.